I should have known something was wrong when Dad asked me to wear a dress to Colin's wedding. My name is Vivian, and I've been sleeping in my Honda Civic for 3 days now. But let me back up to the moment everything fell apart. The moment I realized my own father had been planning to destroy me all along. The wedding reception was in full swing when Dad tapped his champagne flute with that stupid butter knife. Everyone quieted down, all smiles and tipsy laughter, while I stood there in borrowed heels that were cutting into my ankles. I'd gotten the dress from Goodwill that morning, navy blue, slightly too big, but it would have to do. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dad's voice boomed across the backyard, "I want to thank you all for celebrating Colin and Alexandra today." Colin beamed, his arm wrapped around his new wife. She was practically glowing in her Instagram-worthy reception dress, the kind that probably cost more than I made in 3 months at the diner. "But I have one more surprise for the happy couple," Dad continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. That's when I saw it, the manila envelope, the same one that had been sitting on his desk for weeks, the one he'd quickly shuffled papers over whenever I walked into his office. "Colin, Alexandra, as a wedding gift, your mother and I—" He glanced at Grace, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We want to give you the family estate, the house, the land, all of it. It's yours now." The crowd erupted in cheers. Alexandra actually squealed, jumping up and down like she'd won the lottery. Colin looked stunned, then broke into that golden boy grin that had gotten him everything his entire life. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Dad," I called out, my voice barely audible over the applause. "Dad, what about—" He looked right at me, right through me, really. His eyes were cold, calculated. "You'll leave anyway," he said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "You're a daughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but most were too drunk or too focused on Colin and Alexandra's celebration to really process what had just happened. I stood there, frozen, while my brother hugged Dad and Alexandra started crying happy tears. Grace was already on her phone, probably posting about their generous gift to social media. "Vivian." Colin finally noticed me standing there. "You okay?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him if he knew, if he'd been part of this plan, or if he was just Dad's willing accomplice in my erasure. Instead, I forced a smile. "Congratulations! I'm just surprised." "I know, right?" "We had no idea!" Alexandra gushed, already taking selfies with the deed. "We're going to renovate everything. Maybe start a lifestyle blog about it." The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I made small talk, smiled when people looked my way, and pretended my world hadn't just collapsed. When the last guest finally left around midnight, I helped clean up like nothing had changed. It wasn't until I got to my car that I realized something else was wrong. My overnight bag was sitting on the passenger seat, the one I'd left in my childhood bedroom that morning. I ran back to the house, my borrowed heels clicking against the driveway. The front door was locked. I used my key, but it wouldn't turn. They'd changed the locks. "Dad!" I pounded on the door. "Dad, what the hell?" Grace opened it, still in her reception outfit but with her makeup smudged. "Vivian, please don't make a scene. Your things are in the car." "My things?" "Grace, I live here." "Not anymore." She handed me a piece of paper. "Your father thought it would be easier this way, less dramatic." It was an eviction notice, dated 3 weeks ago. "You can't be serious. Colin and Alexandra need space to start their new life. And honestly, dear, you're 25. It's time. She closed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. I sat in my car for hours, staring at the house where I'd grown up, where Mom had tucked me in every night until cancer took her when I was 12, where I'd spent my teenage years bouncing between foster homes before finally aging out and coming back to the only family I had left. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd survived the foster system, worked my arse off to stay connected to Dad and Colin, only to be discarded the moment it became convenient. Around 3 a.m, I opened the glove compartment to look for tissues. That's when I found it. A sealed envelope with my name written in Mom's handwriting. One I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I held it up to the dome light. How long had it been sitting there? I was about to tear it open when a police cruiser pulled into the driveway behind me. The officer tapped on my window with his flashlight. "Ma'am, I need you to move along. We got a call about someone loitering." I rolled down the window, still clutching Mom's letter. "This is my family's house. I'm not loitering." "Do you live here?" The question hung in the air. Technically, as of 3 hours ago, the answer was no. "It's complicated. I'm going to need you to find somewhere else to park for the night." I drove to a 24-hour Walmart parking lot and finally opened the envelope. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost tore the letter. "My dearest Vivian, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I pray you never have to open this, but I need you to know the truth about our house, about what I'm leaving you. Your father doesn't know I'm writing this. He thinks the cancer will pass, that we'll grow old together in the house we built, but I can feel it spreading, and I need to protect what's yours. Under the floorboards in your bedroom, beneath the loose board by the window where we used to watch for fireflies, there's a tin box. Everything you need is in there. The house was mine before I married your father. My grandmother left it to me. I never changed the deed after we married because I wanted to make sure you and Colin would inherit equally. I'm sorry I won't be there to fight for you, but promise me you'll fight for yourself. All my love, Mom." I read it 3 times before it sank in. The house was Mom's, not Dad's, not some family property he could just give away. I waited until Tuesday when I knew Colin and Alexandra would be on their honeymoon in Cabo. Grace had posted their flight details on Facebook like she always did. No sense of privacy, that woman. I parked 2 blocks away and walked to the house. The spare key was still hidden under the fake rock by the garden shed. Some things never change. The house felt different. Colder. Grace had already started redecorating, replacing Mom's family photos with generic art from Home Goods. It made my stomach turn. I crept upstairs to my old room. They'd turned it into a guest room, complete with beige everything, and a sign that said, "Blessed," in cursive font. I wanted to throw up. The floorboard by the window was still loose. I pried it up with my car key and felt around until my fingers hit metal. The tin box was exactly where Mom said it would be. Inside, old photos of Mom as a young woman, standing in front of the house with a "sold" sign. A deed dated 1987 with only her name on it, and a locket I'd never seen before with a photo of me as a baby. But there was something else. A folder labeled "Important Papers" in Mom's neat handwriting. Inside were copies of property tax records, all in her name, insurance documents, and a will dated just 2 months before she died. The will left everything to me and Colin equally, 50-50 split of the house and all assets. I photographed everything with my phone, then grabbed a few more documents from Dad's office while I was there. Recent property transfers, tax records, anything that might be useful. That's when I found the smoking gun. A deed transfer dated 18 months after Mom died, transferring the property from estate of Margaret Martin to Raymond Martin, sole owner. The signature looked like Mom's, but she'd been dead for over a year when it was supposedly signed. Even more interesting, the notary stamp was from someone whose license had expired 6 months before the document was dated. I took photos of everything and got out of there fast. Back in my car, I spread the documents across my dashboard like a detective in some crime show. The timeline was clear. Mom died. Dad waited long enough for people to forget the details, then forged a transfer to put everything in his name. Then he could gift it to Colin without anyone questioning his right to do so. My phone buzzed. A text from Colin. "Hey, sis. Hope you're settling in okay wherever you landed. Alex wants to know if you want any of your old furniture before we donate it." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Keep it all. I won't be needing it." "You sure? The desk has some sentimental value, right?" The desk where I'd done homework every night, where Mom used to sit with me and help with math problems. "I'm sure." I drove to the library and used their computers to research property fraud, statute of limitations, how to prove forgery, what constitutes elder abuse if someone forges a dead person's signature. The more I read, the angrier I got, and the more hopeful. 3 hours later, I had a plan. It wasn't going to be quick, and it wasn't going to be easy, but Dad had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the daughter he threw away. 2 weeks of sleeping in my car taught me things I never wanted to know, like which Walmart parking lots have security that actually patrol at night, which gas stations let you use their bathrooms without buying anything, how to make a sleeve of crackers and a can of tuna last 2 days. I was brushing my teeth in a McDonald's bathroom when the manager knocked on the door. "Ma'am, you can't camp out in here." "I'm not camping. I'm just—" "Look, I don't want to call the cops, but you've been in there 20 minutes. I gathered my toiletries and left. The morning rush was in full swing, families grabbing breakfast before school and work. Normal people living normal lives. My phone was down to 15% battery. I'd been rationing it, only using it for job applications and researching lawyers. The documents from Mom's tin box were in a manila folder on my passenger seat, growing more wrinkled each day from me pulling them out to study. I drove to the women's shelter on 5th Street. Not to stay, they had a waiting list longer than my arm, but because they had a public bathroom and sometimes let people charge their phones. A woman with kind eyes and greying hair was unlocking the front door when I pulled up. "We don't open for services until 10, she said, but not unkindly. "I just need to use the restroom. Please, I'll be quick." She studied my face, taking in the dark circles under my eyes, my unwashed hair pulled back in a messy bun. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" "I'm fine. Just need the bathroom." "I'm Penny. I run this place." She held the door open. "Come on in. Coffee's already brewing." The shelter was cleaner than I expected. Bright yellow walls covered with inspirational quotes and children's artwork. It smelled like disinfectant and fresh coffee. "Bathroom's down the hall. Take your time." When I came out, she had a cup of coffee waiting for me, along with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. I can't pay you for this. Did I ask you to? I ate like I hadn't seen food in days, which wasn't far from the truth. Penny sat across from me, sipping her coffee and not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. You're not using, she said finally. What? Drugs, alcohol. I can usually tell within 5 minutes. You're running from something else. Family stuff. The worst kind. She refilled my coffee cup. I used to be a lawyer, before I started this place. That got my attention. What kind of lawyer? Family law, mostly. Divorce, custody, estate disputes. Saw a lot of women get screwed over by men who thought they were smarter than the system. I pulled the manila folder from my purse and slid it across the table. Hypothetically, if someone forged a dead person's signature to steal their property, what would that be called? Penny opened the folder and started reading. Her expression changed as she went through each document. This isn't hypothetical, is it? No! Jesus! She held up the forged deed transfer. This is felony fraud. Multiple felonies, actually. Who did this to you? My father. She was quiet for a long time, studying the documents. You have copies of everything? Photos on my phone. Good. Don't let these originals out of your sight. She pulled out her phone. I'm going to make a call. There's someone you need to meet. I can't afford a lawyer. Let me worry about that. She stepped outside to make her call. I finished my eggs and tried not to get my hopes up. I'd been disappointed too many times already. When she came back, she was smiling. Abigail Santiago. She runs a firm that specializes in cases like yours, pro bono work for women who've been financially abused by family members. She'll take my case. She wants to meet with you first. But Vivian? Penny sat back down. What you have here, this level of fraud, is not just about getting your house back. Your father could go to prison. The thought should have scared me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. When can I meet her? This afternoon, if you're available. Which, I'm guessing you are. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Abigail Santiago. Penny gave me your number. Can you be at my office at 2 p.m. today? We need to talk. What you have is bigger than you realize. I showed Penny the message. She doesn't waste time, Penny said. That's good. Time isn't on your side with something like this. What do you mean? Statute of limitations. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to prosecute. But if what I'm seeing in these documents is accurate, your father didn't just steal from you. He committed identity theft, forgery, and fraud. Federal crimes. I stared at the documents spread across the table. 2 weeks ago, I thought I'd lost everything. Now it looked like I might be able to take everything from him. Penny, thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Abigail's office was nothing like the stuffy law firms you see in movies. It was in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and plants everywhere. 3 women worked at standing desks, and I could hear someone on a conference call speaking rapid-fire Spanish in the next room. Vivian? A woman in her 30s approached me, wearing jeans and a blazer that probably cost more than my car. I'm Abigail. Thanks for coming. She led me to a conference room where a younger guy was already waiting, surrounded by stacks of papers and 2 laptops. This is Dan, my research specialist. He's been digging into your father's business records since Penny called. Dan looked up from his laptop. Your dad's been busy. Really busy. Abigail spread my documents across the table. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. I walked them through Mom's death, the foster care years, moving back home, and the wedding night ambush. Dan took notes while Abigail studied the forged deed. This notary, she said, pointing to the stamp. Patricia Williams. Her license expired in March 2019. This document is dated September 2019. So it's definitely forged? Oh, it's forged, but that's just the beginning. Dan turned his laptop toward me. I ran your social security number through a property database search. Your father used your identity to co-sign loan documents when you were 17. That's impossible. I was in foster care. Exactly, which makes it identity theft. Abigail leaned back in her chair. How much do you know about your father's contracting business? Not much. He does home renovations, small commercial jobs. He's been using the house as collateral for business loans, multiple loans. And when I say multiple, I mean he's leveraged that property for about $2 million in debt. My stomach dropped. 2 million? Gets better, Dan said, pulling up another screen. He's been claiming you as a dependent on his taxes for the past 3 years. Getting earned income credit, child tax credits, the works. I'm 25. I haven't lived with him consistently since I was 18. Doesn't matter to the IRS if they don't know about it. Abigail stood up and started pacing. Vivian, what we're looking at here isn't just property fraud. It's a pattern of financial abuse that goes back years. Tax fraud, identity theft, forgery, possibly money laundering if he's been moving funds through shell companies. What does that mean for me? It means we're not just getting your house back. We're taking him down completely. Dan pulled up Facebook on his laptop. Your brother and his wife have been posting about their renovations. Look at this. The screen showed Alexandra's Instagram story from that morning. She was standing in what used to be Mom's kitchen, now gutted down to the studs. Demo day. Can't wait to see our vision come to life. Blessed life. Estate renovation. New beginnings. They're destroying everything, I whispered. Actually, they're creating evidence, Abigail said. Every social media post, every receipt, every contractor they hire, it all proves they knew the house wasn't legally theirs to renovate. My phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Vivian, we need to talk. Some lawyer called asking questions about property records. What have you done? I showed them the message. Don't respond yet, Abigail said. Let me guess. She's going to want to meet, try to work something out, maybe offer you some money to go away quietly. How did you know? Because I've seen this playbook 100 times. The family realizes they're in legal trouble, so they try to buy off the victim before it goes public. Dan's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then covered the mouthpiece. It's the court clerk. They want to know if we're ready to file. Abigail looked at me. This is your last chance to walk away. Once we file these papers, there's no going back. Your father will know exactly what you're doing, and he'll fight dirty. What happens if we file? Emergency injunction to stop any further renovations, forensic accounting of all his business records, criminal referral to the DA's office, asset freeze on his bank accounts. She paused, and a very public court battle that will probably make the local news. Grace texted again. Please call me. We can work this out as a family. I thought about Mom's letter, about sleeping in my car, about Dad looking right through me at the wedding and saying I'd leave anyway. File it. Dan spoke into the phone. We're ready. Send the courier. Abigail sat back down. Vivian, I need you to understand something. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Your family is going to say terrible things about you. They'll try to paint you as unstable, vindictive, maybe even dangerous. Let them. They might file a restraining order, claim you're harassing them. Are they? Grace already did. This morning. She slid a paper across the table. Temporary restraining order. You can't go within 500 feet of the house or contact any of them directly. I stared at the legal document. They're scared. They should be. Dan closed his laptop. I just got confirmation. The FBI's white-collar crime unit wants to review the case file. The FBI? Your father used the Postal Service to mail fraudulent documents. That makes it federal mail fraud. Abigail smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Vivian, meet me here tomorrow at 9 a.m. We have a lot of work to do. I walked out of that office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Powerful. My phone buzzed with another text from Grace. This is going to destroy our family. Is that what you want? I typed back. You destroyed it first. Then I blocked her number. 3 months later, I was sitting in a sterile conference room at the county courthouse, wearing a suit Abigail had bought me for the mediation. Across the table sat my entire family with their lawyer, a nervous-looking man who kept shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. Dad looked older, grayer. The confident man who'd handed over my inheritance like it was nothing had been replaced by someone who kept checking his phone and tapping his fingers on the table. Let's begin, said the mediator, a woman in her 50s with the patience of someone who'd seen every family drama imaginable. Ms. Martin, your legal team has presented some serious allegations. Abigail opened her briefcase. We have documented evidence of systematic fraud spanning 7 years. Forged signatures, identity theft, tax evasion, and illegal use of a minor's social security number. This is ridiculous, Colin said. Dad would never. Your father forged your mother's signature 18 months after her death. Dan interrupted, sliding a document across the table. The handwriting analysis came back yesterday. 0% match to your mother's actual signature. Grace leaned forward. Vivian, honey, we can work this out. Family doesn't sue family. Family doesn't steal from family either, I said. Dad finally spoke up. You always were ungrateful. Your mother spoiled you, made you think you deserved everything handed to you. Raymond, their lawyer, warned quietly. No, she needs to hear this. Dad's voice was getting louder. I raised you. I put a roof over your head when no one else would take you. And this is how you repay me? You put me in foster care when Mom died. Because you were out of control. Running away, getting in trouble at school. I was 12, and my mother had just died. The mediator held up her hand. Let's focus on the legal issues. Ms. Santiago, what are your client's demands? Abigail pulled out a thick folder. Full restitution of the property, including all improvements made with fraudulent funds, damages for emotional distress, and criminal prosecution for all federal crimes committed. Criminal prosecution! Alexandra spoke for the first time, her voice shaky. We didn't know anything about forged documents. We just accepted a wedding gift. A wedding gift of stolen property, Dan said. And according to your social media posts, you've spent over $200,000 on renovations. Money that came from loans secured with fraudulent collateral. Colin grabbed Alexandra's hand. We'll pay it back, whatever it takes. With what money? Abigail asked. Your father's business accounts are frozen. The house is under court-ordered asset protection. And the IRS is conducting their own investigation into 7 years of fraudulent tax returns. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This is extortion. No, I said, my voice steady. This is consequences. Their lawyer whispered something to Dad, who shook his head violently. My client would like to propose a settlement, the lawyer said. Mr. Raymond is willing to transfer the property back to Ms. Vivian in exchange for dropping all criminal charges. Counter-offer, Abigail said. Full property transfer, plus $500,000 in damages, plus Mr. Raymond's public admission of fraud, plus cooperation with federal investigators, and we don't drop the criminal charges. That's insane, Grace said. Raymond doesn't have $500,000. Then he shouldn't have committed $500,000 worth of fraud. The mediator called for a recess. As everyone filed out, Colin caught my arm. Viv, please, this is destroying our family. I looked at him, really looked at him. The golden boy who'd gotten everything while I got nothing, who'd accepted a stolen house without asking a single question. You destroyed it the night you took that deed. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. When we reconvened, their lawyer looked defeated. My clients reject the settlement offer. Then we'll see you in court, Abigail said, standing up. Discovery starts Monday. We'll need all financial records, business documents, and personal communications from the past 7 years. As we packed up our papers, Dad stood up. You think you've won something here? You think destroying your family makes you strong? I met his eyes. I think taking back what was stolen from me makes me smart. Your mother would be ashamed of you. The words hit like a physical blow, but I didn't flinch. My mother would be proud that I fought for what she left me. Outside the courthouse, a local news crew was waiting. The reporter approached us with a microphone. Ms. Martin, can you comment on the federal fraud investigation involving your family's estate? Abigail stepped in front of me. My client has no comment at this time, but as we walked to the car, I heard the reporter's voice behind us. Sources close to the case say the fraud may total over $2 million, making this one of the largest family estate fraud cases in county history. My phone buzzed with a text from Penny. Saw the news. How are you holding up? I typed back. Better than they are. That night, I treated myself to a hotel room, a real bed, a hot shower, room service. As I was falling asleep, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Vivian? It's Colin. Please don't hang up. I almost did, but something in his voice stopped me. What do you want? Dad's having chest pains. He's in the hospital. I hung up on Colin and called Abigail. Don't go to the hospital, she said before I could even explain. It's either a manipulation tactic or it'll look like harassment given the restraining order. What if he's actually dying? Then he should have thought about that before committing federal crimes. The next morning, Dan called me at 6 a.m. Turn on Channel 7 News, now. I fumbled for the hotel remote. The morning anchor was standing outside the courthouse. Federal agents raided the offices of Raymond Martin Construction yesterday evening, seizing computers and financial records in connection with an ongoing fraud investigation. Sources tell us the case involves forged documents and identity theft spanning nearly a decade. The screen cut to footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of Dad's office building. Then, a photo of our house appeared. The investigation centers around this property, allegedly stolen through forged estate documents after the owner's death in 2015. My phone started ringing. Unknown numbers, probably reporters. I let them all go to voicemail. At 9 a.m. I met Abigail and Dan at their office. The mood was different, electric, focused. The FBI found everything, Dan said, spreading printouts across the conference table. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified loan applications. Your father wasn't just stealing from you. He was running a sophisticated fraud operation. What does that mean? It means the federal prosecutor wants to offer you a deal, Abigail said. Full restitution, including the house and all assets. Your father pleads guilty to avoid a 20-year prison sentence. What's the catch? You have to testify at his sentencing hearing. Tell the judge how his crimes affected you. Before I could answer, Dan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and frowned. It's Colin. He's asking to meet with you. Absolutely not, Abigail said. The restraining order? He says he wants to surrender the house, voluntarily. Today. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Colin looked terrible, unshaven, wearing the same clothes from the mediation. Alexandra wasn't with him. Where's your wife? I asked. Gone. Back to her parents in Phoenix. She filed for divorce yesterday. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Quit claim deed. I'm signing the house back to you. I opened it. Legal documents transferring all rights to the property back to me, signed and notarized. Why? Because Dad lied to me, too. Colin's voice was flat. I found out yesterday that he took out a second mortgage on the house last year, used my Social Security number to do it. I'm on the hook for $300,000 I never borrowed. Jesus. The FBI showed me the loan documents, my signature, but I never signed them. He forged my name just like he forged Mom's. Abigail studied the quitclaim deed. This doesn't stop the federal case. I know, but maybe it helps. Colin looked at me. Vivian, I'm sorry. I should have asked questions. I should have wondered why Dad was giving away Mom's house. You should have. I was greedy. We both were. We saw that big house, and all we could think about was how it would look on Instagram, how impressed our friends would be. He rubbed his face. Alexandra's been posting about our estate renovation for months. Now everyone knows it was built on fraud. Where are you staying? Dad's hospital room. He's not actually dying, by the way. Panic attack, but the stress is real enough. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Rebecca Chen from Channel 7 News. Would you be willing to do an on-camera interview about your family's fraud case? I showed it to Abigail, who shook her head. Not yet. Let the legal process play out first. Colin stood up. There's something else? Dad wants to see you. No. He says he has something that belongs to you, something of Mom's he never gave you. What? He won't tell me, just says you'll want it. That afternoon, against Abigail's advice, I went to the hospital. Dad was in a private room, looking smaller than I remembered. Grace was there, along with their lawyer. You came, Dad said. Colin said you have something of Mom's. He reached into the bedside table and pulled out a jewelry box I recognized from Mom's dresser. Her wedding ring, the real one, not the cheap replacement I bought after I pawned it. Inside was Mom's engagement ring, a simple solitaire I remembered her wearing every day until she got too sick to keep jewelry on. Why are you giving me this now? Because I'm going to prison, and because... He stopped, looking older than his 58 years. Because your mother made me promise to give it to you when you got married. I'm not getting married. Maybe someday you will, and when you do, you'll have something of hers with you. Grace was crying quietly in the corner. This doesn't change anything, I said, slipping the ring onto my right hand. You still stole from me. You still threw me away. I know. Then why? He was quiet for a long time. Because I was scared you'd leave, like she did. Mom didn't leave. She died. Same result. I walked out without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, the judge accepted Dad's guilty plea. 24 months in federal prison, full restitution, and permanent forfeiture of his contractor's license. The house was officially mine. I stood in the driveway of my childhood home for the first time in 6 months, holding the keys the court had given me that morning. The house looked different, bigger somehow, but also emptier. Colin and Alexandra's renovation had been half finished when the asset freeze hit. Exposed drywall, missing cabinet doors, a kitchen island sitting in the middle of what used to be Mom's living room. Penny pulled up behind me in her beat-up Honda. You sure about this? She asked, getting out of her car. I'm sure. We walked through the front door together. The smell hit me first, sawdust and paint fumes mixed with something else. Abandonment, maybe. It's going to need a lot of work to make it livable again, Penny said, running her hand along the torn-up hardwood floors. That's not what I'm planning. I led her upstairs to my old bedroom. They'd started to convert it into a master suite, knocking out walls and installing a massive walk-in closet. But you could still see the window where Mom and I used to watch for fireflies. This is where she hid my inheritance, I said, pointing to the loose floorboard. Right here, she made sure I'd have something to fight for. And now? Now I'm giving it away. Penny raised an eyebrow. Come again. I pulled out the paperwork I'd had drawn up the week before. I'm donating the entire property to the Women's Crisis Center. They're going to turn it into a residential facility for women escaping domestic violence. Vivian, this house is worth over $1 million. I know. That's why it'll help so many people. We walked back downstairs. In the kitchen, someone had left a note taped to the refrigerator, Alexandra's handwriting. Thanks for ruining our lives. Hope you're happy now. I crumpled it up and threw it in the construction debris pile. Are you happy? Penny asked. I'm something better than happy. I'm free. My phone rang. Abigail. The paperwork went through. The donation is official. But Vivian, I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this? You could sell this place, take the money, start over somewhere new. I am starting over. Just not the way anyone expected. What about the restitution money from your father's assets? Keeping that? I earned it. After Penny left, I walked through the house alone. In Mom's old bedroom, I found something Colin and Alexandra had missed. A photo album wedged behind the radiator. Pictures of Mom and me baking cookies, planting flowers, reading bedtime stories. The last photo was from my 12th birthday, 2 months before she died. We were sitting on the front porch, both of us laughing at something Dad had said while taking the picture. Mom looked so young, so alive. I took the album with me. That evening, I drove to the cemetery for the first time since the funeral. Mom's headstone was simple granite with her name and dates. Someone had left fresh flowers, probably Grace, trying to ease her guilt. "I got it back, Mom," I said, sitting cross-legged on the grass. "The house, the truth, everything you wanted me to have." A jogger passed by, giving me a curious look. I didn't care. "But I'm not keeping it. I hope that's okay." "I think you'd understand." The wind picked up, rustling the oak tree above her grave. "Dad's in prison. Colin lost everything. Grace is probably going to divorce him while he's locked up." I pulled out the photo album. "I should feel bad about that, right?" "But I don't. I just feel done." I left the birthday photo on her headstone, weighted down with a small stone. 3 months later, I was standing on the front porch of a brownstone in Brooklyn, signing the final papers with a real estate agent. My new home, bought with Dad's restitution money and a mortgage I could actually afford. "Congratulations," the agent said, handing me the keys. "It's a great neighborhood. Very up and coming." The house needed work. New floors, updated kitchen, fresh paint everywhere. But it was mine. Really mine. No forged documents, no family drama, no strings attached. Dan helped me move in my few belongings, mostly clothes and the legal documents that had changed my life. Abigail brought Chinese takeout and a bottle of champagne. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To justice served cold," Dan added. "To moving forward," I said. We ate dinner sitting on the floor of my empty living room, talking about everything except the case that had brought us together. Later that night, after they'd gone home, I sat on my front steps and called Penny. "How's the new place?" "Perfect. Quiet. Mine." "Any regrets?" I looked up at the brownstone's windows, imagining how they'd look with curtains and plants and all the signs of a real life. "Just one." "What's that?" "I wish Mom could see this. Not the house, but who I became. The daughter who stayed and fought." "She can see it," Penny said. "Trust me on that." I pulled out my phone and took a selfie on the front steps, then opened a new email. 2. Email protected. Subject: From the daughter who stayed. "Dad, this is my new address, the home I bought with the money you stole from me. Thought you should know what a daughter who stays looks like. Don't write back. Vivian." I attached the photo and hit send. Then I blocked his email address and went inside to start my new life. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Margaret Martin Women's Crisis Center was on a Tuesday morning in October. I stood in the back of the crowd, wearing Mom's engagement ring and watching as the mayor gave a speech about community support and second chances. "This beautiful facility will provide safe housing for up to 12 women and their children," he said, gesturing to the house that used to be my prison. "Thanks to an anonymous donation, we can offer comprehensive services including legal aid, job training, and childcare." The crowd applauded. Local news cameras captured everything. I stayed hidden behind a group of volunteers, not ready for that kind of attention. Penny found me after the ceremony. "You should have been up there cutting that ribbon," she said. "This isn't about me anymore." "Like hell it isn't. You turned your trauma into something that'll help hundreds of women." A reporter approached us with a microphone. "Excuse me, are you familiar with the anonymous donor? We'd love to get their story." "Sorry," I said. No comment. As the crowd dispersed, I walked up to the front porch where I'd spent so many nights as a kid, waiting for Mom to get home from work. A brass plaque by the door read, "In memory of Margaret Martin, beloved mother and advocate." "Vivian?" I turned around. Colin was standing at the edge of the yard, looking uncertain. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the news coverage. I figured—" He gestured helplessly. "I wanted to see what you did with the place." He looked different. Thinner. Older. The golden boy shine was completely gone. "Where are you living now?" "Apartment across town. 1 bedroom. I'm working at a hardware store." He laughed bitterly. "Minimum wage. Turns out a business degree doesn't mean much when your last job reference is a federal fraud case." "And Dad?" "Still in prison. He writes me letters sometimes. I don't read them." We stood there awkwardly, two strangers who used to share a childhood. "I'm sorry," Colin said finally. "For all of it. For taking the house, for not asking questions, for letting him treat you like you didn't matter." "I know." "Do you forgive me?" I looked at the house behind him, already bustling with activity as staff prepared for the first residents. "I don't forgive you, Colin, but I don't hate you either. I just don't think about you anymore." He nodded like he'd expected that answer. "For what it's worth, what you did here, turning it into something good. Mom would have loved it." "Yeah. She would have." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Are you happy, Viv?" "I'm free. That's better than happy." That evening, I was painting my kitchen when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Ms. Martin, this is Jessica Torres from Netflix Documentary Films. We're interested in optioning your story for a limited series about family fraud and financial abuse." "How did you get this number?" "Your attorney, Abigail Santiago, gave us your contact information. She said you might be interested in telling your story on a larger platform." I set down my paintbrush. "What kind of story?" "The kind that shows other women they don't have to accept being thrown away by their families. The kind that proves the legal system can work when you know how to use it." "I'll think about it." "There would be compensation, of course, potentially significant compensation." I said I'll think about it. I hung up and called Abigail. "Netflix, really?" "Your story is powerful, Vivian. It could help a lot of people. Or it could turn my trauma into entertainment." "That's your call. But think about it. How many women are out there right now, getting screwed over by family members who think they can get away with it because they're women? How many could use a roadmap for fighting back?" She had a point. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. Mom's grave looked different in the fall light, surrounded by orange and red leaves. I'd brought the newspaper clipping about the crisis center opening. "Look what we built, Mom," I said, placing the article next to her headstone. "Your house is helping people now. Real people with real problems, just like we had." A groundskeeper was working nearby, raking leaves. He nodded politely and kept working. I got a call about telling our story. Making it into something bigger. I sat down on the grass. "I think you'd want me to do it. You always said I had a voice worth hearing." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery. "I stayed, Mom. I stayed longer than they ever deserved me to. And it was enough. I stood up, brushing dirt off my jeans. As I walked back to my car, I pulled out my phone and called Jessica Torres. This is Vivian Martin. About that documentary. Let's talk. Because some stories are too important to keep to yourself. Some fights are worth sharing, and sometimes the daughter who was supposed to leave anyway becomes the one who changes everything. I drove home to my brownstone, to my life, to my future. Behind me the leaves kept falling, covering the past with something new.
My name is Reese Delaney. I was 29 years old the day my family dragged me into court and called me a liar to my face. A fake, a fraud, a disgrace to the uniform I once wore. They didn't say my name when they testified, just she and the defendant. My mother, sitting in the front row in her navy suit, never looked at me once. My cousin Garrett, who I grew up sharing birthday cakes with, leaned forward with a smirk like this, was a show he'd been waiting to headline. The prosecutor raised his voice for effect. There is no military record of Ms. Delaney in any public archive, no honorable discharge, no verified service. And yet she accepted a folded flag at her grandfather's funeral, dressed in a uniform she had no right to wear. I didn't flinch. Instead, I looked straight ahead at the folded flag they'd placed on the table as evidence. The same flag that once sat in my lap while taps played and my knees trembled. The judge glanced at me, expecting a reaction, an objection, a defense, but I remained silent, because I knew what they didn't. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors of that courtroom would open, not for the bailiff, not for a lawyer, but for something older, deeper, more sacred than anything that had ever passed through that courthouse. The ceremony was coming, and when it began, every lie they told would fall quiet. The first time I heard the word fraud wasn't in court. It was in my aunt's kitchen 3 days after we buried Grandpa. I had gone back to return the keys to his truck. He used to let me drive it whenever I was home on leave, though he never asked questions about where I'd been or what uniform I wore. That afternoon, the house smelled like burnt coffee and old lemons, and my uncle was shouting something about stolen valor from the other room. I set the keys on the counter. My mother turned, arms folded. Her face was cold, composed, like she'd been waiting for me to show up just to deliver the blow. "You shouldn't have worn the blues," she said. "It was disrespectful. You were never in active service." My hands twitched. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I'd worn the dress uniform Grandpa kept pressed in his closet, the one he made me promise to put on for his funeral. I had followed his exact instructions right down to the silver pin he told me to wear on the right lapel. I cleared my throat. I was in the Air Force. Her laugh was sharp, humorless. "What, some base tech training for 6 weeks, then you disappeared for years?" "That doesn't make you a soldier, Reese." That word again disappeared. She made it sound like I vanished for selfish reasons, like I hadn't spent 4 years operating in classified terrain, pulling comms in places where nothing had a name, much less a return ticket. My cousin Garrett entered with a manila envelope. He dropped it on the counter. "We've filed a petition," he said. "Probate court. The flag, the medals, the inheritance, none of it belongs to you. You forged service claims. There's no public record." I stared at the envelope. "You're suing me?" I asked. My voice cracked more from disbelief than emotion. "For clarity," my mother said coolly, "we want what's fair." I remember the floor felt uneven under my boots, like the tile had shifted under my weight. For a second, I couldn't speak. Then something steadied inside me. I picked up the envelope, slid it into my coat. "Fine," I said. "Let's do this in court." Garrett blinked, clearly expecting me to panic. My mother's mouth curled slightly downward, as if uncertain what to make of my calm. I didn't tell them then, but I'd already made a call the night before. To someone whose name didn't show up in public records either. The moment they decided to drag my service through the mud, they gave me the one thing I never had with them before permission to answer back. They always said I disappeared. What they never asked was what I disappeared into. I enlisted 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. No party, no send-off. Just a one-way flight out of state, and a silent dinner the night before with my mother tapping her fork, and my stepfather scrolling through his phone. I tested into recon training 6 months later, Air Force Special Reconnaissance. It wasn't a job that made it onto recruitment posters. We didn't wear bright pins or talk about what we did. That was the point. We were ghosts. For the next 4 years, I lived in the blanks of official records. I deployed twice to places I'm still not allowed to name. We monitored signals in forests that didn't exist on any map, ran black box retrievals from crash zones the news never covered, watched movement in border towns no one admitted we were near. There were no selfies, no welcome home banners, no safe way to explain why I came back with a limp and a line of scar tissue down my spine. When I returned for Grandpa's 78th birthday, I hadn't seen the family in over 2 years. Garrett joked that I'd been off finding myself, and my mother introduced me to a neighbor as the one who quit college for some government internship. I didn't correct her. What would I have said that I'd spent the last 6 months sleeping in mud under blackout tarps, transmitting data packets through storm static, and dragging a bleeding teammate through a ravine under fire? Even if I could tell them, they wouldn't have heard it. Only Grandpa listened. That night, he walked out to the porch and handed me a beer without a word. We sat in the dark for almost an hour, just breathing the Carolina summer air. Then he asked softly, "You still carrying it all?" I didn't answer. But I think he already knew. He handed me a folded slip of paper. It was worn like he'd opened and refolded it 100 times. Inside was a name and a number. If you're ever forced to speak, he said, you call this man. He'll know how to open the right doors without dragging you through the wrong ones. That name, Colonel Vincent Rourke, was the only person in my life who outranked both fear and blood ties. I tucked the note into my Bible and never touched it again, until the day after my mother served me court papers. That night, I sat on my apartment floor uniform, still hanging in its garment bag by the door, and stared at the name. My finger hovered over the keypad longer than I expected. When the line finally picked up, a gravel voice said Delaney, "I hoped I'd never hear from you again." I exhaled. "Sir, I need to verify service, not for benefits, for court." He paused. "You want a letter?" "No, sir. I want silence. Until I walk into that courtroom." The next thing he said wasn't a question. It was an order. "Then wear the blues. And stand still. We'll take care of the noise." I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being invisible. I was afraid of being seen. Court was scheduled for a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that pretended to be ordinary. Blue sky, crisp air, no wind, like the world had pressed pause just long enough for people to lie under oath. They called it a clarification hearing, as if dragging a veteran into court over a folded flag and a funeral request was just a technical misunderstanding. I walked in alone. My lawyer, Janet Gresham, had been court-appointed, underfunded, overworked, and honest to a fault. She was the first person to look me in the eye after reading the file and say, "We're not going to win this with paperwork." I nodded. "I know." She narrowed her eyes. "But you have something, don't you?" I said nothing. She leaned back and folded her arms. "Then let me do the legal talking, and you do what you're here to do." Which I assume is not beg. It wasn't. Inside the courtroom, Garrett had dressed for drama, 3-piece suit, polished shoes, smug expression. He made sure the photographers saw him first. My mother arrived 10 minutes late with her attorney and a printed binder titled Evidence of Misrepresentation. No one sat on my side of the aisle. The judge, a tall woman with gray hair, pulled into a knot so tight it made her look like she'd been carved from stone, called us to order. She glanced at me only once before inviting the petitioner to present their case. My cousin took the stand with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She accepted military honors under false pretense, he declared. She wore a uniform without commission. She falsified rank, and she manipulated an old man into rewriting his will. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I looked at the flag. That was the only thing in the room that still felt real. When it was our turn, Janet stood up slowly. She didn't object to anything. She didn't raise her voice. She simply handed the judge a sealed envelope and requested that it remain unopened until our final day in court. The judge raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly is this formal response from a classified office within the Department of the Air Force?" Janet said. "Verified through chain of custody. The recipient has been cleared for limited disclosure, non-documentary." The judge studied her. "You're asking me to delay ruling based on..." A live verification. Yes, Your Honor, a demonstration of truth that does not exist on paper. There was silence, long, tense. Then the judge nodded. One condition, she said. If what you're planning wastes this court's time, I will dismiss your claim with prejudice and recommend charges for impersonation. I nodded. Understood, ma'am. Janet sat down beside me, scribbled something on a legal pad, then paused. She looked over. What are you expecting to happen? She whispered. I looked at the courtroom doors. At exactly 9 Andro, I said I stopped being the defendant. She blinked, then smiled, and said nothing else. The final day of court arrived on a Thursday. The gallery was full before I even walked in. Someone had tipped off the local press. A few military blogs, too. I recognized a photographer from the county paper near the back, already clicking through her settings like she expected something headline-worthy. I wore the same uniform I had at Grandpa's funeral, pressed blue silver pin on the right lapel. My boots were polished to a mirror shine. Not for them. For him, Garrett was already seated tapping his pen against a folder. My mother wore a navy blouse, pearls at her neck, and that look of wounded propriety she'd mastered years ago, like everything she did was reasonable, and everything I did was personal. The judge entered precisely at 8:58. She scanned the room with the same distant authority as always, then cleared her throat. We are reconvened. Defense has submitted no further documentation, but requested a special procedural allowance under Federal Verification Clause. We will hear the demonstration shortly. She turned to Janet. Your witnesses, Janet rose. Your Honor, they should be arriving now. And as if on cue, the double doors opened. 7 men and women stepped into the courtroom, each in full Air Force service dress. They moved in silence formation, perfect boots striking the floor with steady rhythm. One carried a triangular wooden case, the kind used only for flag transfers. Another held a sealed black folio. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Garrett half-turned in his seat. My mother's stiffened hands clenched in her lap. The group halted before the bench. The officer in front, a silver-haired colonel, with ribbons across his chest, stepped forward. Your Honor, he said, voice calm and commanding. I am Colonel Vincent Rourke, retired, formerly attached to Special Reconnaissance Command. I'm here under instruction from the Department of the Air Force to perform a recognition ceremony for Technical Sergeant Reese Delaney. My heart jumped into my throat. The judge blinked. Recognition. Here. Yes, ma'am. Authorized under Classified Service Clause. Ceremony authorized in lieu of sealed documents due to national security restrictions. Verification conducted through in-person protocol under oath. The judge looked to me. I stood. Sergeant Delaney Rourke said, turning toward me, You served 5 years under Special Reconnaissance Command 2 forward deployments. 3 commendations, 1 injury sustained in line of duty. I nodded once. He opened the folio and read aloud. By authority of the Secretary of the Air Force, and with the endorsement of your former commanding officer, this court is hereby informed of your active duty service, honorable discharge, and fulfillment of all terms under Title 10 of the United States Code. The accusations levied against you are unfounded, and your uniform honors and conduct are recognized as legitimate by the United States government. He closed the folio. Then he turned and nodded to the airman holding the case. The young man stepped forward and set the wooden box on the table between the judge and counsel tables. He opened it with precision. Inside lay a neatly folded American flag framed by a velvet lining. Rourke gestured for me to step forward. Sergeant Delaney, he said, voice lowering, this flag was meant to be presented to your grandfather's next of kin in accordance with military tradition. Per his final request, it was designated for you. We now return it to you formally, with full honors and no further questions. I didn't realize my hands were trembling until I reached for the case. The wood was warm from being carried. The flag inside still had one corner, turned just slightly off the way Grandpa used to fold them during drills, always insisting that a flag should have a flaw to remind us it's been through something. I held the case to my chest and exhaled. The colonel took a step back and saluted. I returned the gesture. Silence fell. Thick. Total. Even the judge didn't speak. Finally, Janet stood. Her voice was soft but steady. Your Honor, we move to dismiss all claims with prejudice, and we request the court seal the petitioner's statements as false, defamatory, and harmful to a confirmed veteran. Garrett shot to his feet. This is insane. That man, he's not even active. The judge didn't look at him. She looked at me. Sergeant Delaney, do you wish to respond to the charges? I turned to face my cousin. His face was flushed eyes, wide hands trembling at his sides. I wore that uniform because I earned it. I said, voice low. I didn't need your permission then. I don't need it now. My mother stood, mouth slightly open. You never told us. I met her eyes unblinking. You never asked. The judge brought down the gavel. One crisp strike. Case dismissed. Sergeant Delaney, you are free to go, with this court's respect. As I turned to leave, Colonel Rourke followed me to the door. Just before I stepped out, he leaned close and said, He would have been proud of how still you stood. I didn't answer. I couldn't. But the flag in my arms was answer enough. I didn't speak to anyone after I left the courtroom. Not the reporters flanking the steps with outstretched microphones. Not the clerk who tried to hand me the official dismissal paperwork, like it would somehow make any of this feel resolved. Not even Janet, my attorney, who walked beside me in silence for half a block before turning down a different street without a word. She understood. Words weren't the currency of the moment. I walked a lone flag case clutched tight to my chest like something sacred. My boots echoed too loudly on the pavement. I didn't know if the sound came from the rubber soles or the weight of everything I'd carried into that courtroom, years of silence, humiliation, and the aching question that never seemed to leave. Did it count if no one ever saw it? Apparently, it did, but I didn't feel vindicated. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I didn't go home right away. I wandered. Let my feet lead me past shuttered shops, a diner where the waitresses still wore name tags in cursive, a post office where the flag was half-mast for someone I'd never meet. I stopped in front of a church, not to pray, just to breathe, and stared at the stained glass until I forgot what time it was. When I finally reached my apartment, the sun had tilted low behind the buildings, casting long shadows that made everything seem quieter than it should be. I set the flag down on the mantel, its glass front catching the last of the evening light. Then I sat on the floor, not on the couch, not at the table, just the floor, my back against the cold drywall, knees pulled close, boots still on, and palms open on my thighs, like I was bracing for an aftershock that never came. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. There's a kind of grief no one teaches you how to hold, the kind that comes from spending your whole life trying to be good, trying to serve, trying to endure, only to find yourself on trial not for what you failed to do, but for what you were never given permission to speak aloud. That was what I carried now. Not victory, not relief. Just the heaviness of finally being seen, and all the years it took to get there. 2 days later, I drove to the airfield outside town. The old one, where Grandpa used to volunteer on weekends, keeping inventory on grounded aircraft, and replacing bolts that no one else noticed were rusting. He used to say even retired machines deserved respect. I found Chief Master Sergeant Doyle in the hangar, wiping down a weathered propeller blade like it was an altar. He looked up when I entered. Didn't salute. Didn't say thank you for your service. Just narrowed his eyes like he was searching me for fractures. You stood still, he said. I nodded. He handed me a tin mug with scorched coffee. Then you did your job. We sat under the wing of a training plane that hadn't flown in 20 years and talked about things that had nothing to do with court weather systems, engine failures, the old vending machine that used to eat everyone's quarters. Then he asked about Marisol, about the girl in my unit who used to hum country songs when we hiked under cloud cover. She was the kind who made storms sound like lullabies, I said. He nodded slowly. She made it no. We didn't speak after that for a while. When the sun began to slide down the back of the trees, I stood and walked the edge of the runway alone. The wind picked up, brushing through the tall grass. My boots left shallow prints on the cracked tarmac. I stopped at the faded yellow marker where planes once lined up to take off and stood there, just breathing. That's the thing no one tells you about silence. It's not just the absence of noise. It's a form of presence, of choosing not to run, of holding your place even when everything inside you is screaming to vanish. Stillness is a decision, and standing still in front of your accusers, wearing a uniform they told you wasn't real, while the military honors your name before the bench where they tried to shame you, that's not quiet. That's power. Back home, I opened the old cedar box under my bed. The one that held the few pieces of my former life I hadn't been able to throw away. A unit coin, a torn notebook full of coordinates, a photograph of 6 of us drenched and grinning under a camouflage tarp during monsoon season. I added the court summons, folded it cleanly, slipped it between the pages. Not out of spite, not as a warning, just as a record. Something that said this too happened, and I stood through it. A week later, a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single note on military stock paper, handwritten in black ink. Stillness is not the absence of motion. It is the presence of will. Rourke. I taped it to the wall above my desk, just above the framed citation that came with the flag. These days, when people ask what I do or where I served, I don't explain. I don't list bases or missions or clearances. I don't try to prove what I lived. I just say calmly, I stood where I was assigned. And I didn't move. And for the first time in my life, that's more than enough. My name is Lena Ashford. I served as a major in the United States Army for 9 years. 3 deployments, 2 commendations, and 1 Purple Heart. And today, I sat in court as my own family tried to erase every trace of that life. They said I stole the identity of a dead veteran. They told the judge I was mentally unstable. They called me a fraud, a liar, a parasite. I said nothing. My brother Brandon pointed across the room at me like I was a criminal. His voice cracked with performative outrage as he held up what he called evidence. My parents sat behind him, mother dabbing fake tears, father with his arms crossed cold and clean in his favorite courtroom blazer. The judge turned to me. "Miss Ashford," he said, "do you have any response to these allegations?" I looked at him steady. I didn't reach for a folder or raise my voice. I simply adjusted the silver watch on my left wrist, the one that had been given to me by my commanding officer the day I retired. Then I met the judge's eyes. "No, Your Honor," I said, "I don't." A beat passed. "Someone else will speak for me." And just then the double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Boots echoed on the polished floor. A tall man in full uniform stepped forward, his medals shining under the harsh fluorescent lights, and I finally let myself exhale, because I knew exactly who he was. And so did they. I didn't come from a military family. My father was a regional bank manager, obsessed with order and appearance. My mother floated between yoga studios and garden clubs, and my brother Brandon, he was the golden one. Captain of the lacrosse team business school darling, the one who made everyone proud without ever really trying. Me, I was the quiet one. I liked puzzles and radio signals. I joined the Army at 19 not because I wanted medals, but because I needed a language for discipline that wasn't punishment. The military gave me that. Structure, purpose, silence without shame. I rose fast. Not because I knew how to play the game, but because I didn't. I followed orders, stayed late, volunteered when no one else did. And when my unit was deployed to Helmand Province, I became one of the first women to lead a joint recon op in the area. I didn't tell my family much. Part of me wanted to keep that world sacred. Part of me didn't want to explain why I'd chosen something so far from what they expected. They sent Christmas cards and news clippings about Brandon's promotions, but they never asked what I did overseas. Not even once. When I came home after my final tour, tired, limping, and changed, they didn't meet me at the airport. I remember sitting on the curb with my duffel, watching other soldiers run into the arms of their parents. I told myself it was okay. They weren't good with feelings. They probably didn't know the flight time, but deep down, I knew. They didn't come because they didn't understand who I had become, because they never really wanted to. I moved to Texas a few months later and used my retirement stipend to start something that mattered. Ashford Haven, a small community center for female veterans struggling to reintegrate. It wasn't fancy, just 6 cabins and a converted barn we used for trauma recovery programs, group PT, and night watch groups. Word spread. A senator toured the place. The local paper did a spread on our work. We got a grant from the Veteran Women's Leadership Initiative. That was when the phone calls started. Brandon wanted to discuss the family name being attached to politics. My mother sent emails laced with concern. "Do you really think this image is good for you, honey?" My father called me a few times, asking why I'd never mentioned any real injuries when I visited home. I never answered any of them, but I knew what it really was: control. They couldn't stand that I had built something they didn't understand, didn't fund, and couldn't manipulate. Then came the subpoena. Brandon filed it personally, claiming I had forged my service history and was collecting funds meant for real veterans. In the filing, he included screenshots of my old private Instagram, a blurry photo of me at a barbecue with no uniform, and a note saying I had never been deployed to a combat zone. He knew. Of course he knew. But Brandon had one gift above all else. He could make a lie sound like concern. That's when I realized something deeper than betrayal was at play. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. He wanted the world to forget who I had been. And worst of all, he thought he could get away with it. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not just the air, but the way people looked at me, curious, unsure, some even skeptical. The woman checking IDs at security gave my license a second glance before waving me through. One of Brandon's lawyers spotted me in the hallway and smiled like he was about to sell me something. I said nothing. I had chosen not to wear my dress uniform, not out of shame, out of defiance. I wanted them to see me as I was plain, navy suit, flat shoes, no ribbons, no declarations. Because if they couldn't recognize a soldier without the armor, then they didn't deserve the truth. Inside the courtroom, Brandon sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by two attorneys in sleek charcoal suits. My parents sat right behind him. My mother wore her favorite pearl earrings. My father looked bored, as if this were a routine meeting, not a public crucifixion of his daughter. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I kept my eyes forward. The bailiff called the case. Brandon's lead attorney stood first. He began with what he called a matter of public trust. Your Honor, he said, this is a difficult case. Our client did not want to bring it forward, but the defendant, Ms. Lena Ashford, has presented herself as a veteran of the United States Army. She has accepted public funding, media attention, and nonprofit grants under this claim. We will show today that this representation is false. He then held up an enlarged image, me maybe 22, wearing jeans and a hoodie at some backyard party. This, Your Honor, is the defendant at the time she claims to have been in Afghanistan. No uniform, no deployment orders, no record of injury, no DD 214 on file. I didn't flinch. They continued like that for 20 more minutes, laying out doctored timelines, questioning inconsistencies, casting doubt on paperwork that had been redacted for security reasons. They even brought up the fact that I used a P.O. box for all Ashford Haven correspondence, as if privacy was proof of deceit. When they finished, Brandon rose. I didn't want to believe it, he said, voice steady. But the more I looked into it, the more things didn't add up. I couldn't let her keep lying. Not about something this serious. Not when real soldiers die every day. He turned and looked right at me. I knew my sister. And this isn't her. There was a murmur in the room. The judge banged the gavel for quiet. I remained still. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "You sure you don't want to take the stand?" I nodded once. "Let them talk." He sighed, leaned back. The judge turned to our side. "Defense?" My lawyer stood. "We have submitted sealed documents to Chambers, Your Honor, including active service records and sworn statements. Due to the nature of my client's prior assignments, full disclosure is restricted by federal classification protocols." He paused, then added, "However, we are calling one final witness to address the matter publicly." Brandon's attorney scoffed. A surprise witness. The judge didn't object. Then I heard it. The side door opened with a hiss. Heavy boots on the courtroom floor, measured steps, controlled weight, and then a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. "Permission to approach, Your Honor." My heart stopped. There he was. Lieutenant General Raymond Keller, my former commanding officer. 3 stars on his chest. Dozens of campaigns under his belt. The man who once told me I was the calm in 1,000 storms. The courtroom turned silent. My mother froze. Brandon's jaw moved, but no sound came out. General Keller approached the bench, handed a thick envelope to the bailiff, and turned to the room. "My name is Raymond Keller. I served with Major Lena Ashford. I commanded her unit from 2012 to 2015, and I stand here today to say every accusation made against her is false." He let that hang in the air. Then slowly he raised his hand to his brow and saluted me. I didn't move, didn't cry, just nodded once because some truths are too deep for words. General Keller stood at the center of the courtroom like he belonged there, not as a prop, not as a token military face, but as a man with weight in his words and decades behind his posture. When he saluted me, it wasn't ceremonial. It was recognition. He turned to the judge, and his voice dropped low, measured, steady, undeniable. I oversaw Major Ashford's operations in Kandahar, Herat, and Helmand Province. She led over a dozen high-risk reconnaissance missions and saved the lives of 4 soldiers during a blackout incident in late 2013. I was there. I saw it. The judge nodded for him to continue. General Keller opened the envelope he had handed to the bailiff. Inside were original orders bearing Department of Defense seals, tactical deployment rosters, commendation certificates, and most damning to the prosecution, a dated photograph. It showed me in full fatigues standing in front of a downed vehicle in the middle of an arid field, a bloodied bandage on my left arm, 2 soldiers flanking me. Brandon's lawyer squirmed. General Keller pointed to the image. That was taken 3 hours after we lost radio contact. Major Ashford stayed behind to retrieve classified intel under active fire. She could have left with the others. She didn't. She stayed. And she brought all of them back. He turned to the courtroom. If this is the person you're accusing of fabrication, then maybe you ought to rethink who's really lying. A silence spread like wildfire. Then Brandon leapt to his feet. Anyone can forge documents. I don't care what kind of metals she faked. She's been lying to us for years, cutting us off, building some self-righteous war shelter just to feel superior. The judge held up a hand, but Brandon kept going. She's always had this savior complex. She needs people to think she's special. That's why she made all this up, because she can't stand that nobody cares. My lawyer rose. Your Honor. But the judge didn't need prompting. His voice sliced clean through the tension. Mr. Ashford, sit down. Brandon hesitated, trembling. Now. He dropped back into his seat. The judge looked to General Keller. Sir, I appreciate your testimony. It is clear, thorough, and compelling. Then he looked at me. Miss Ashford, do you wish to respond? I stood slowly, not out of nerves, but to give my voice room. I didn't come here today to prove anything to my family. I came here because I was accused publicly, legally, and I had to answer. But I will say this. I turned to Brandon. You knew. You always knew. You read the letters. You saw the discharge forms. You just didn't like that I built something without your help. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. And as for our parents, I added, shifting my gaze, you had every chance to ask me who I was. You chose not to. That's not confusion. That's willful ignorance. My mother's eyes glistened, but I didn't stop. You didn't lose a daughter. You just never looked close enough to see the one you had. I sat down. The bench beneath me felt like stone, but my spine held firm. General Keller nodded once, then stepped back. As he passed my chair, he murmured just loud enough for me to hear, You never needed me to speak for you, Ashford. But it was time they heard it from someone they couldn't ignore. And then he walked out, every step punctuated by the weight of truth. Behind me, Brandon collapsed into his hands. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something shift in the room. Not pity, not admiration, respect. The judge called for a recess, but no one moved. The courtroom held its breath. Brandon sat stiffly, fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face, usually so composed, so curated, had collapsed into something raw. He wasn't angry now. He looked cornered. My parents remained behind him, frozen in place. My mother still clutched her clutch bag with both hands, the knuckles of her ringed fingers trembling. My father stared straight ahead, as if by refusing to look at me, he could rewind the day back into something more manageable, something deniable. I didn't move. I watched. Because for once I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to prove anything. They were unraveling themselves. The judge returned after 10 minutes, his robe shifting slightly as he sat. I've reviewed the documentation provided by General Keller. He began, voice cool, measured. And I've conferred with the Department of Defense Verification Office. There is no question in the court's mind that Miss Ashford did in fact serve with distinction in multiple active duty roles during her tenure in the U.S. Army. He paused, eyes landing on Brandon. What I do question is the motive behind this lawsuit and the extent to which this court's time has been wasted in pursuit of something that amounts to little more than personal spite. Brandon opened his mouth, But the judge raised one hand sharply. No, you don't get to spin it now. The judge turned to me. Miss Ashford, the court dismisses this case with prejudice. Furthermore, I will be referring the matter to the district attorney's office for potential charges of defamation and civil harassment, should you wish to pursue them. I nodded once. I won't. I just want it to end. He studied me for a beat longer, then gave a subtle nod of respect. You're free to go. My lawyer reached for my papers. I stood, slowly turned to leave, then stopped. Brandon was still sitting there looking at the floor. My mother had begun to whisper something to him, but it wasn't soothing. It was frantic, almost desperate. Like she couldn't believe they hadn't been believed, that the script hadn't played out in their favor. I stepped closer, just far enough for them to hear me. You didn't fail to protect the family name, I said quietly. You just failed to realize it was never yours to protect in the first place. My father looked up at that. Not in rage, but confusion. I carried this family's name into places you couldn't even imagine. I wore it when it weighed more than body armor. You had a chance to honor that. Instead, you tried to bury it. Brandon's eyes flicked toward me, rimmed red. You shut us out, Lena. No, I replied, voice like glass. You shut the door. I just stopped knocking. And then I left. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and uncaring. I blinked against it, the light foreign after hours under courthouse fluorescence. A few reporters waited at the bottom of the stairs, microphones poised like weapons. I raised a hand not to wave, but to halt them. No comment. Because this wasn't about press. It wasn't about image or vengeance, or even justice anymore. It was about reclaiming something simple. The truth of who I was without apology. I reached the curb. A dark sedan waited across the street, one of the volunteers from Ashford Haven behind the wheel. As I crossed, I saw a reflection in the window. Me standing tall face bare. No uniform, no shield. Just me. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I didn't go back to the center right away. After the verdict, after the gavel fell, and the courtroom emptied like the aftermath of a storm, I got in my truck and just drove. No GPS, no destination. I followed the longest road west into the hill country, where the air smelled like cedar and the sky was finally, blessedly silent. 3 days. I spent 3 days alone in a rental cabin with cracked wood floors, mismatched chairs, and a tiny stone fireplace. I left my phone powered off in the glove compartment. I didn't want congratulations. I didn't want apologies. I wanted stillness. And maybe, if the silence lasted long enough, understanding. Each morning, I sat on the back porch with a black enamel mug full of instant coffee and watched the fog lift from the treetops. No medals, no cameras, no headlines. Just the sound of birdsong and the creak of wood that hadn't been varnished in years. The world didn't care that I'd been vindicated. And strangely, that comforted me. On the third evening, I opened the small box I kept in the side pocket of my bag. Inside was a frayed compass pendant, its needle long broken, the face scratched from years of wear. It had been a gift from Lieutenant Harper, the first woman I'd ever served under. She gave it to me in Helmand after a failed mission when I'd blamed myself for a young corporal's injury. You don't have to always know where you're going, she'd told me. You just have to keep moving toward who you are. I held the pendant in my palm for a long time that night. Then I tucked it into my jacket and turned back toward home. When I reached Ashford Haven, the gates opened like they had missed me. The gravel crunched under the tires, and from the main building, I saw the porch lights blink on. Someone had seen me coming. Tara was the first to appear barefoot, carrying 2 mugs, like a soldier returning from patrol. "You look like hell," she said, grinning. I grinned back. Good. Means I'm home. Inside, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. On my desk was a pile of handwritten notes pinned neatly under a weight stone shaped like a star. Some said thank you. Others simply signed their names, a kind of silent salute. One stood out in particular. It was from Alicia, the Air Force tech sergeant, who couldn't look anyone in the eye when she first arrived. Her note was only one line. "You showed me that being silent didn't mean being weak." That one stayed with me. A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name in plain block letters. Inside was a photo, me and Brandon, maybe 6 and 8 years old, building a fort out of pillows in our childhood living room. We were laughing. On the back, he'd written, "I don't expect anything, but I remember this. And I hope you do too." I didn't cry. I didn't reply. I placed it in a drawer next to my discharge papers, and that one yellowed page of an op log from Kandahar, the one where my name was spelled wrong, but my actions recorded right. That felt symbolic enough. Some memories don't need to be rewritten, just acknowledged. The award ceremony came and went. The mayor spoke too long. The press wanted sound bites. I gave none. The real moment for me came when Jasmine, one of our first program graduates, stood up beside me and with a voice clear as glass, said Lena Ashford didn't come back from war to be celebrated. She came back to build something, and she let the rest of us stand on that foundation. That was the first time I felt my chest crack open again, not with pain, but with breath. That night, I returned to the greenhouse alone. I walked the rows of native herbs and slow-growing fruit trees. I ran my hand along the soil we'd amended by hand, each inch planted by someone who once thought they'd never grow again. I sat on the bench in the far corner, the one shaded by 2 cypress trees, and watched the stars rise. No audience, no need for armor. And I thought maybe healing isn't loud. Maybe it's just a quiet, steady place you return to over and over again until you stop flinching. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying my name like a burden. I was carrying it like a banner. My name is Elena Ford, and on the day my brother called me a liar in open court, I didn't speak a word. The courtroom was cold, too cold for May. I sat with my back straight, hands clasped in my lap, as Mason leaned into the microphone with all the smugness of someone who thought he'd already won. She fabricated her service, he declared. My sister never spent a single day in uniform. He made it sound like fact, like justice, like truth finally being aired out in front of family lawyers and the goddamn press. Somewhere behind me, a reporter clicked her pen twice. Clean, eager. My attorney shifted in his seat, waiting for me to respond, but I didn't. Instead, I stood. One button at a time, I unfastened the cuff of my left sleeve, rolled it back, and turned my arm so the light from the high windows could catch it clearly. Silence followed. Not the courtroom kind where people just stop talking, but the real kind. Thick. Heavy. Like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. There, inked just above my forearm crease, was a mark they couldn't erase. Blackguard Division 7-2. Mournfall Protocol. KIA status revoked. I didn't need to explain it. Those who understood already did, and those who didn't weren't supposed to. When I sat down again, Mason's face had lost all its color. The judge stared, and I finally allowed myself a slow, deliberate breath. 6 years before that courtroom, I disappeared. It wasn't literal, not at first. I still existed on paper for a little while, a name, a rank, a blood type. Corporal Elena Ford, United States Army, Tactical Communications. Then came Operation Mournfall, classified high risk, officially non-existent. They told us before we deployed that if it failed, no one would come looking. We thought they were bluffing. We were wrong. The mission fractured, fast ambush radio blackout, 2 days in the dark. We lost half our unit in the first 20 hours. I was medevaced out through a side corridor of the mountains, 2 ribs broken, left leg torn up from shrapnel. They flew me straight to an off-grid facility deep in the Nevada desert, where no names were spoken out loud, and you signed your silence in blood. By the time I stood again, the war had moved on. My name had been quietly transferred to KIA status, then 2 months later, amended in a hidden addendum, KIA status revoked. Not for public dissemination. I wasn't dead, just forgotten. And in some ways, that was easier than trying to explain. I didn't go home. There wasn't really a home to return to anyway. Mason had already moved into our father's house, repainted my old bedroom, and told anyone who asked that I'd died serving my country. He made a donation in my name to a scholarship fund I'd never heard of and gave a speech about sacrifice at the Rotary Club. I watched the clip online. He cried on stage, cried. Funny thing was, when I left for basic training, Mason hadn't even texted goodbye. My father told me to come back when I had a real job. And my mother, she just nodded like she was too tired to pretend she cared. So I stayed gone. I took contract work, quiet stuff. Discreet signal intelligence for unmarked teams. A few years embedded as a ghost advisor in places I'm not allowed to name. I lived in shadows, moved between safe houses, kept my name off every lease, every phone bill, every digital trace. But even ghosts need roots. 3 years ago, I bought a little place in Wyoming, remote, safe, unremarkable. There was a greenhouse out back and an old oak in front that split down the middle like it had survived 2 storms and refused to fall. I liked that tree. I grew tomatoes, read a lot of history, and taught myself to sleep with both eyes closed again. Then, 2 months ago, a certified envelope arrived with a lawyer's seal and my brother's name on the return address. Inside, a court summons. Mason was suing to remove me from our father's will on grounds of fraudulent military service. He claimed I'd faked my death, exaggerated combat history, and manipulated my way into veteran benefits. I stared at the page for 5 full minutes before laughing, not because it was funny, but because I realized he truly believed I would stay silent forever. He thought the Elena he buried was the only version that ever existed. And he was wrong. I didn't want the house, or the land, or the retirement account our father kept locked up in some Florida trust fund. I wanted one thing: to stand in front of him once, just once, and let the truth undo everything he thought he'd won. And the courtroom was the only place quiet enough for that kind of truth to land without being interrupted. I used to think Mason envied me. When we were kids, he'd borrow my books, follow me around the yard, pretending he cared about stars or maps or codes. But he always circled back to himself, his trophies, his spot on the varsity team, his ability to charm our father with half a sentence and a handshake. Our father was the kind of man who measured worth in volume. The louder you were, the more right you must be. Mason inherited that. I didn't. I was quiet. I asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. I disappeared into books, took apart radios for fun, memorized signal codes, for no reason other than I liked the rhythm of them. When I told my father I wanted to join the military, he laughed. Not cruelly, just dismissively. "You," he said. "You couldn't handle a paper cut, Elena." He didn't know I'd already passed the written assessments, or that I'd been training in secret with an old retired comms officer who lived 3 blocks down and used to run Black Ops in the 90s. I left 2 weeks later. No goodbye party, no packed lunch. Mason was busy that day, or so he said. My mother hugged me stiffly in the driveway, then handed me a Bible I never opened and said, "Just don't embarrass yourself." That was the last time I saw any of them in person until court. It's strange how grief works in a family like mine. When I went MIA during Operation Mournfall, they didn't mourn me. They polished me. They built a narrative. Mason called a local news station, told them I died heroically, holding off enemy forces to save civilians. I don't know where he got the details. Maybe he pulled them from a war movie or a dream where he finally mattered more than me. The article went semi-viral in a small town kind of way. A folded flag ceremony, a plaque in the high school gym, even a speech from our father at the county fair. He said I died with honor. He didn't know I was alive, but he never tried to find out. He liked me more as a symbol than as a daughter. I don't know what I expected when the letter came. Maybe a note from Mason, a line of apology buried somewhere. Instead, I got 5 typed pages from his lawyer accusing me of forgery, deceit, and emotional manipulation of public institutions. It wasn't just about the money. It was about erasing me again. Legally this time. And the worst part, he probably believed it was justified. Mason had always been the one who stayed. The one who looked after Dad when his blood pressure spiked. The one who called the lawyers, signed the hospice forms, picked out the casket. He did everything right, at least on paper. So when I came back from the dead, it wasn't a relief. It was an inconvenience. A variable he couldn't control. I thought about ignoring the summons, letting them have the house, the trust, the entire damn legacy. But something about that felt too familiar. Silence had protected them long enough. And I was done being the ghost they told stories about. I didn't come back to take what was mine. I came back to burn the script they'd written without me. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. I'd been there once as a teenager testifying for a friend's custody case. Back then, I sat in the gallery, knees shaking, eyes wide, wondering how adults turned pain into paperwork. This time, I wasn't watching. I was Exhibit A. Mason's legal team was polished, all pressed suits and forced smiles. His lead attorney, a man named Will Danvers, had that rehearsed calm people wear when they think the facts are on their side. He didn't look at me much, just skimmed his notes, clicked his pen, and waited to speak like he already knew how it would end. I sat alone at the defendant's table. No entourage, no press rep. Just my attorney, Carlina Torres, former JAG prosecutor, now civilian, and me. Carlina warned me not to speak unless prompted. Let them talk, she said. Let them overreach. They did. Danvers opened with a statement that danced the line between insult and theater. Ladies and gentlemen, today is not about grief. It is about deception. My client's sister has impersonated a veteran, profited from a false narrative, and dishonored not just her family, but the uniform itself. I watched Mason as he sat behind Danvers, arms folded, chin tilted upward like he was posing for a statue. He looked so comfortable, like he believed this was a formality, a cleanup job before the money rolled in. He hadn't seen me in 6 years, and even now, he didn't look directly at me. The courtroom was sparsely filled local reporters, a few gray-haired veterans from town, and some distant cousins who looked like they came more for drama than duty. Then Danvers pulled out a folder labeled Department of Defense Inquiry. I recognized it immediately. A decoy. This document, he said, waving it gently, was obtained through FOIA request. It contains a full personnel search. The result, no service record under the name Elena Ford, no deployment, no injury, no unit history, nothing. He let that linger. Say gasps are rare in real courtrooms, but you could feel a shift shoulders stiffening, eyes narrowing. Even the judge arched one brow. Carlina didn't flinch. She simply crossed one leg over the other and said, "Is that your full exhibit for now?" Danvers replied. "Though we're prepared to call character witnesses, including Mr. Ford's colleagues, his late father's estate manager and a retired Army captain who reviewed the record and found no match for the defendant in any public military database." I didn't move, because he wasn't wrong. There was no record, not in any public database. That was the entire point. I'd been buried by the system that created me, hidden inside layers of classifications so dense even I couldn't pull myself out without triggering federal review. That was the price of surviving Operation Mournfall. After the recess, Danvers pivoted to motive. He painted me as a manipulator, someone who disappeared for years, only to reemerge at the exact time of our father's death. He called it convenient, accused me of exploiting our family's grief to claim a false stake in a hero's legacy. I bit down hard on my tongue. Mason didn't flinch, didn't smile either, just sat there still and smooth, like a man watching the last stone fall into place. The judge turned to Carlina. "Counselor, do you have evidence to rebut the plaintiff's claim?" Carlina didn't hesitate. "We do, Your Honor, but I'd like to call a witness first." The defendant. The courtroom stirred. Danvers stood. "Objection. We were not notified." The judge waved him off. "Overruled. Ms. Ford may testify." Carlina turned to me and nodded once. I stood slowly, heart steady, and as I made my way to the witness stand, I could feel the room adjusting posture, shifting notebooks raised, tension tightening like a pulled thread. Mason watched me now, really watched. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. Carlina's voice was calm. "Ms. Ford, were you ever enlisted in the United States Army?" "Yes." "Were you ever deployed?" "Yes." "To where undisclosed location under a mission classified as Operation Mournfall?" That got the reaction I expected. Danvers leaned forward. "That's not a recognized military operation." Carlina smiled barely. "Correct. It isn't public." "Then how can we verify it?" I didn't answer him. Instead, I turned slightly toward the judge. "Your Honor," I said, "may I present visual evidence?" He hesitated, then nodded. I stood once more, rolled back the left sleeve of my black blazer, and turned my arm outward toward the bench, the gallery, and the man who once called himself my brother. A hush fell. Even Danvers stopped mid-breath. On my skin, burned deep into the flesh through black and silver ink, was a single band, a circular emblem surrounded by hash marks and a designation code. At the center, Blackguard Div 7-2, Mournfall, status KIA revoked. The tattoo was permanent, specific, and encoded. No civilian artist could fake it. No non-operative would even know what to imitate. You had to earn it. I turned back toward the judge's sleeve still rolled. My name was removed from the registry because I was never supposed to come back. But I did. And this is the only record I ever had. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, because silence was finally louder than their lies. No one moved, not the judge, not the gallery, not Mason. The air inside that courtroom felt suspended, like we were all holding the same breath, unsure if we were supposed to exhale. The silence stretched. Then a voice broke through, soft but commanding, from the back of the room. Permission to approach the bench. Your Honor, all heads turned. A woman in full military dress uniform stepped forward, her silver service stripes glinting beneath the ceiling lights. Her ribbons were precise, her posture sharper than any blade in the room. State your name and rank, the judge said, blinking. Colonel Esther Blake, she replied. Special Operations Command, retired. ID 304 and 17 Delta, clearance Alpha 2. The judge stiffened slightly. Proceed. Colonel Blake walked with the kind of weight you only earn by surviving more than you lose. She stopped beside the bench and opened a leather-bound folder. Inside was a sealed envelope marked with a federal insignia and 3 red bands across the top. I'm here on request from the Department of Defense, she said. This is a Level 3 verification of Operation Mournfall and the personnel formerly classified under Blackguard Division 7-2. The courtroom gasped again, quieter this time, like no one wanted to be caught breathing too loud. The judge glanced at the seal. You're confirming the operation existed. I'm confirming she was there, Blake replied, nodding toward me, and that she's the reason I'm standing here today. The room spun for Mason. His mouth opened, but no words came. Colonel Blake turned, now facing the gallery directly. Her voice never rose, but every syllable landed like gravel on glass. Corporal Elena Ford was embedded as tactical comms lead during the Mournfall incursion. She held the line after command fell, rerouted evac signals, and stayed behind under sniper fire to ensure extraction. She wasn't just a soldier, she was the spine of the mission. I looked down, jaw clenched. It wasn't pride that choked me. It was the memory, the sounds, the smell of heat and iron and bone. Blake continued. When the mission was buried for political reasons, we buried them with it. Their names, their histories, their sacrifices. But one thing survived. She turned her eyes to me. That tattoo. It wasn't just identification. It was a pact. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. Colonel, do you have documented proof that this designation was approved by DoD authorities? Blake handed over a small steel drive. Encrypted files. Password protected. You'll need 2 keys, one is in this folder. The other is already in the clerk's office, filed under sealed motion. If you match them, you'll find full confirmation. The judge nodded once. Solemn. Mason stood suddenly. This is ridiculous, he barked. You're all just taking her word for it. A tattoo. A woman in a uniform walks in and suddenly she's a war hero again. His voice cracked on the word again. Colonel Blake turned to face him, eyes flat. You know what's interesting, she said. Real soldiers don't scream in courtrooms. Mason's attorney tried to tug him down, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. Carlina rose beside me. Your Honor, we formally request dismissal of all claims against my client, including defamation, fraud, and misrepresentation. Furthermore, we reserve the right to pursue countersuit based on malicious prosecution. The judge didn't argue. He simply looked at me, then back to the files in front of him. All claims against Ms. Ford are dismissed with prejudice, he announced. Full military status acknowledged. Hearing adjourned. The gavel fell like thunder. Colonel Blake stepped closer and held out her hand. I rose slowly and shook it. She leaned in, voice low enough only I could hear. Your file's been restored. You're not erased anymore. I nodded. My eyes didn't sting. Not quite. But my throat burned. She stepped back, saluted once, then turned and walked out. The gallery didn't clap. They didn't need to, because the truth had already spoken. Louder than any verdict, more final than any gavel. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't fighting to be believed. Mason didn't speak to me after the verdict. He didn't look at me either. He stormed out of the courtroom like a man expecting the applause to follow him, and stunned when it didn't. His shoes echoed down the marble corridor, too loud, too fast, like someone trying to outrun a collapse. Carlina touched my elbow. We're done here. But I stayed for a moment longer. I wanted to feel it, this quiet, unremarkable moment, where no one was asking me to prove myself anymore. Outside, the sun had dropped behind the courthouse dome, leaving long shadows across the plaza. The wind had picked up, spring trying to remember how to be summer. I stepped onto the steps and saw them. Reporters. Maybe 7, maybe 10. Not a crowd just enough to turn the air brittle. One held up a mic. "Ms. Ford? Do you have a statement?" I shook my head. Another leaned forward. "Will you be filing charges against your brother?" I paused just for a breath. Then I said no. A few cameras clicked. A few pens moved. But the silence that followed was real, and it was mine. I didn't walk down those steps with triumph. I walked down like a soldier who'd just buried the last ghost. The war was over. The map had closed. There was nothing left to prove. 2 weeks later, Mason's lawyer quietly withdrew from his firm. The countersuit went through, and though I didn't demand damages, the court levied fines for legal abuse and obstruction. Last I heard, Mason was trying to sell our father's lake house to cover costs. No one was buying. He sent me an email once. No subject line, no greeting, just 5 words. "You humiliated me on purpose." I didn't reply. Because I hadn't. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't called him names. I hadn't stormed out or shouted down or asked for applause. All I'd done was show the truth, and he was right about one thing. That truth had humiliated him, but it wasn't me who did it. He wrote his own script. I just stopped playing the part he gave me. Conclusion. The scar that speaks 250 words. A month after the verdict, I went back to Wyoming. The house was still there, quiet as ever. The oak tree out front stood the same, split down the center like a living scar. But this time, I didn't see damage. I saw survival. I brewed coffee that morning, black and bitter, just the way the old medics used to make it. Then I sat on the porch legs tucked under me and pulled out the only thing I'd kept from the trial, a photo someone printed for me of the courtroom. Grainy, slightly off-center, but clear enough. In it, I was standing beside the witness box sleeve rolled up, the tattoo visible, my face turned away, no headline. My name is Marin Calloway, and I wasn't invited to the courtroom, but I came anyway. I walked in quietly, just as the bailiff was closing the side doors. My mother glanced over her shoulder, caught sight of me, and her lips thinned like I was an unexpected stain on an otherwise perfect photograph. My father didn't even look up. Delia, my sister, sat with perfect posture, her blonde hair pulled back into the kind of braid that said, "We've already won." They didn't expect me to show. They certainly didn't expect me to speak. I didn't come to make a scene. I came because I knew what they were going to say, and I came with proof. I took a seat on the back bench and waited while our attorney, argued that the revised will of Edgar Calloway was invalid, that I had no legal claim to the estate, that in fact I wasn't technically even family. Then my mother stood and said it aloud, her voice clear and practiced like a rehearsed line. Marin was never our biological child. There it was, not whispered, not behind closed doors, but stated on public record. And still I didn't flinch, because in my bag was a sealed envelope, signed by my grandfather, verified by a notary, containing a truth they'd buried for years, a DNA test, commissioned by the only man in that family who ever treated me like I belonged, and now it was time to unearth what they tried so hard to hide. Before you hear the whole story behind that moment, if you've ever been abandoned, hurt by your own family, and still forced to smile through it, leave a comment. I'm not telling this to complain, but because, maybe somewhere, you've felt what I felt. Now, let me take you back to where it all truly began. I used to think it was my fault that I didn't shine the right way. Delia sparkled. Even as a child, she had this way of catching the light in every room. Her laugh came easily. Her words landed perfectly, and she always seemed to know what adults wanted to hear. I, on the other hand, was quiet. I asked too many questions. I spent more time with beetles and bark samples than with people. By the time I was 8, I'd learned to disappear in my own home. Not by running away, but by staying quiet long enough to be forgotten. At dinners, I listened more than I spoke. At holidays, I stood just outside the frame of every family photo. I don't remember anyone telling me I didn't belong. They didn't need to. The silence did it for them. But my grandfather Edgar saw me. He didn't ask me to change. He came to my 3rd grade science fair when no one else did and stayed long enough to ask questions about my homemade weather balloon. He sent me books about plant biology for birthdays I wasn't sure anyone remembered. I think he saw something in me no one else had the patience to notice. When he passed away, no one told me. I found out through Delia's Instagram post just a soft focus photo of the funeral flowers with a caption that read, "Goodbye, Papa. Rest easy, no date, no call, no warning." When I asked my mother about it weeks later, she just blinked and said, "It was a private service. You were out of state, weren't you?" I was in the same zip code. The truth didn't hit me all at once. It came in pieces, cold shoulders, invitations that never arrived, smiles that never reached their eyes. But it crystallized the day a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, just a thick envelope with a note handwritten and unmistakable. "If you're reading this, then they've started circling. Use this when the time comes." It was signed Edgar Calloway. Inside was a sealed manila folder marked confidential, a DNA test notarized, a second document that said it was only to be opened in court should the validity of the will ever be challenged. I didn't understand then, but I placed it in my filing cabinet behind the lease papers and my degree. I never forgot it. I almost wanted to believe they wouldn't stoop low enough to erase me entirely. I was wrong. Months later, I read in the local business section that the Calloway estate valued in the tens of millions was being disputed. According to the article, the heirs of record had filed a motion to nullify a revised will Edgar had allegedly signed the year before his death. The article listed Ronald, Martha, and Delia Calloway as primary stakeholders. My name wasn't mentioned at all. That was when something inside me shifted. I didn't cry, I didn't call. I just went to my drawer, retrieved the envelope, and booked a flight home. They wanted a courtroom fine, but they were going to have to look me in the eye this time. And for once in their lives, listen. The courthouse in Fairmont hadn't changed in years. Red brick worn steps, and a single magnolia tree out front that bloomed too early every spring. I stood outside for a long time watching the branches shake in the wind. Then I pulled the envelope tighter against my chest and stepped inside. Courtroom 3 was smaller than I expected, the kind of room meant for property disputes and quiet divorces, not the unraveling of a family legacy. But here we were. My family sat at the front in their tailored suits, a fortress of confidence and control. Delia caught sight of me first. Her eyes widened just briefly before she composed herself. Martha turned next, and for a flicker of a second, there was something like panic. Ronald didn't look at me at all. The clerk asked my name. I stated it clearly, Marin Calloway, and handed over my notice of appearance citing my status as a named beneficiary in Edgar Calloway's revised will. There was a murmur behind the bench, a raised brow from the judge, but no objections. I took a seat alone at the defendant's table, across from the people who had raised me and now wanted to erase me. Their attorney began by laying the groundwork. "Your Honor, we believe the revised will filed by Mr. Edgar Calloway was produced under undue influence and is therefore invalid. Furthermore, we contend that the individual listed as Marin Calloway does not have legal standing as an heir." That was the moment. Martha stood. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Marin was never our biological child. She was entrusted to us. A complicated situation, but not our blood, and not a rightful Calloway." The room fell quiet. I didn't stand. I didn't gasp. I simply reached into my bag, placed the sealed envelope on the table in front of me, and asked to approach the bench. The judge looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You're saying you have evidence to the contrary?" "No, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "I have confirmation." She gestured me forward. I handed her the envelope. Her eyes flicked over the seal, then to the notarized certification. "And this was given to you by my grandfather," I said. "He instructed me to submit it if the will was challenged and my status as a Calloway denied." She nodded. "We'll take a recess to review." The courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs trailing behind every pair of departing heels. I stayed seated, my hands flat on the table. I didn't turn to look at them. I didn't need to. When we returned, the courtroom was quieter, tense. The judge addressed the room with clipped efficiency. "The documentation presented is authentic and legally obtained. It includes a DNA test performed 5 years ago under the supervision of a licensed geneticist comparing Ms. Calloway's DNA with both Ronald and Martha Calloway. The results confirm that there is no biological relation." A sharp breath from my mother. A stifled sound from Delia. The judge continued. There is also an attached document handwritten, signed, and notarized by Mr. Edgar Calloway, stating his knowledge of this fact and his intent to include Ms. Mirren Calloway in his will, regardless of blood relation. And then, for the first time since I entered the room, the judge looked directly at me. "Miss Calloway, would you like this letter read aloud?" I hesitated. Then I nodded. The court clerk opened the letter. His voice was level, but something in the room shifted as soon as he began. "To whomever is listening, yes, I knew. I've known since Marin was 5 years old that she was not Ronald and Martha's biological child. But I also knew this of all the people in this family. She is the only one who carries the values I believe in. Intelligence without arrogance, strength without cruelty, integrity without applause." The clerk read on, but I barely heard. Martha's hands were shaking. Delia's eyes were fixed on the floor. Ronald finally turned toward me for the first time that day, and what I saw in his face wasn't anger. It was fear, because this wasn't just about a will anymore. It was about a lie they had built an entire life around, and the fact that I had just made it collapse. The clerk's voice was steady, but every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "She may not be Calloway by blood, but she is Calloway by spirit. And that, to me, is what legacy should be built on, not biology, but character." There was no sound in the room except for the turning of pages and the quiet hum of the ceiling vent. I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I didn't bow my head. I kept my eyes forward, jaw clenched gently, not with anger, but with the weight of everything I had held back for years. I have watched Moran build herself from silence, from being overlooked, dismissed, reshaped. And still, she never lost her kindness. She asked questions others ignored. She paid attention to things that didn't shine. And when no one else saw her, she saw herself. I blinked hard. I could feel it coming. The ache behind my eyes, the catch in my throat. I bit the inside of my cheek. "Not here," I told myself. "Not in front of them. This letter stands as my final instruction. Marin Calloway is to receive what I've left, not because she is my descendant, but because she is my decision." The clerk folded the paper slowly. The judge adjusted her glasses, then turned back to the plaintiffs, my family. "If there is no further objection," she said, "the will stands. The court recognizes the validity of the documents and Marin Calloway's legal right to her inheritance." It was done. No applause, no celebration. Just a simple truth finally acknowledged. Delia stood abruptly. "This is insane," she hissed, her voice cracking. "He gave it to her, the foundation, the house, the copyrights." Her attorney tried to calm her, but she shoved the chair back and pointed at my parents. "You told me if I just stayed close to him, if I kept visiting and played the part, that everything would be mine. You promised." Ronald's lips were pressed so tightly they'd turned white. Martha's expression broke into something between shame and disbelief. "I spent years watching you all pretend," I said, standing slowly. "Pretend I didn't matter. Pretend I wasn't trying hard enough. Pretend I was some charity case you never asked for." The judge tapped her gavel once. "Miss Calloway." But I didn't raise my voice. I wasn't making a scene. "I'm not here for a revenge," I said quietly. "I just needed the truth to breathe." And then I sat back down. Delia stormed out. Her heels clacked like thunder across the polished floor. Ronald followed a moment later, his shoulders stiff as if he couldn't bear the weight of having been seen. Martha lingered. She looked at me, really looked for the first time in years. And then she said it. "You were always so different." It wasn't cruel, it wasn't kind. It was just true. "I had to be," I replied. No one else left room for who I was. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to rationalize. But then the judge dismissed the room, and the moment slipped between us, like a door gently closing. I stayed behind to sign the paperwork. The clerk handed me copies of the documents, including the DNA results and Edgar's letter. "Would you like the original?" he asked. I nodded. "Please." He slid it into a folder and handed it to me like something sacred. I left the courthouse alone. No cameras, no reporters. Just me and a truth that had waited half my life to be spoken aloud. Outside, the magnolia tree had started to drop its petals. White blossoms scattered across the pavement, soft and soundless. I stood there for a while, the folder pressed to my chest, and let the silence settle around me. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The train ride to Vermont was quiet the way I needed it to be. I chose a window seat and didn't speak the entire way, just watched the trees blur past bare branches, clawing at a gray sky farmland, folding into valleys, the kind of terrain that looked like memory. When I arrived, the air smelled like cedar and distant smoke. It reminded me of my grandfather's coat. His house sat on the edge of a hill, overlooking a shallow river and an old apple orchard that hadn't bloomed in years. I'd only been here once as a child for a weekend nobody remembered but me. But everything felt familiar. The green shutters, the mailbox leaning slightly to the right, the creak of the porch under my boots. Inside it was exactly as I imagined, clean, but lived in. A woven blanket draped over a worn leather chair. Books stacked in quiet towers beside the hearth. On the kitchen counter, a folded letter waited with my name in his handwriting. It wasn't dramatic, just a few lines. If you're here, then it worked. I knew you'd carry this with more grace than I ever could. Welcome home, kid. Make something beautiful. I sat down on the floor, my back against the cabinet, and cried for the first time since the hearing. Not the loud kind, the deep kind, the kind that shakes loose whatever you've been gripping too tightly for too long. When I pulled myself together, I started opening drawers. Not out of curiosity, but instinct. I found a photo album tucked between tax forms, pictures of me and Edgar in his garden, me holding a hand-built weather-vane muddy sneakers, a crooked grin. None of these had ever been in our family home. These were his memories, our memories. Then came the files. In the den behind a false panel in the bookshelf, I found a box labeled MC. Inside my science fair entries, every school certificate I'd ever earned, and copies of the scholarships I'd received for college. At the very bottom, plans for a foundation. A real one. Nonprofit registration, forms, letters of inquiry to seed grant funders, and a mission statement typed in all caps to build space for curious minds the world has forgotten. He'd been planning this long before he died, long before I even knew I might inherit something. He wasn't just leaving me land or money. He was leaving me the frame of a future, a mirror of who he saw me becoming. I stayed in Vermont. I gave my notice at the lab I'd worked at in the city, packed up my one-bedroom apartment, and drove north with a U-Haul 2 houseplants and a heart that was still learning how to beat in peace. I spent the first few months cleaning, clearing out fallen branches, restoring his old greenhouse, digitizing his research journals. I didn't speak to my parents. They didn't call. Delia sent an email in April. Just one sentence: I heard you kept the house. I didn't reply. Instead, I filed the paperwork Edgar had started. I named the new research center, after both of us, the Callaway Institute for Applied Curiosity. It wasn't grand, just a converted barn, a second-hand centrifuge, and a grant proposal waiting on a yes. But it was mine. It was his too, and it was enough. I spent my mornings rebuilding the soil in the south field, planting cover crops, tracking pH levels. My afternoons were for writing grant applications, curriculum proposals, a rough sketch of a mentorship program for rural kids who had never seen a microscope. I called it the Quiet Minds Project, because that's what we were, the ones like me, the ones who didn't shout to be heard, but still found a way. One night, I walked out to the back fence and stood where the tree line gave way to the open sky. The stars were clean and sharp out there, like someone had scrubbed them new. I thought about Edgar, about that day in court, about the strange sacred clarity of being known. I didn't need to be anyone else's child anymore. I was his, and that would always be enough. It was nearly a year after the courtroom in early March when the letter came. No return address, just my name, handwritten in faint blue ink across the front. The envelope was official, but age-creased, like it had waited a long time. Inside was a single page folded once and a typed note clipped to it. It was from a state audit office. The note was brief, clinical. My birth file had surfaced during a multi-agency review of infant transfer protocols from the late 90s. It had been flagged twice for unregistered custody reassignment and missing biological identifiers. The attached document was a scan of my birth record. The fields for mother and father had been left blank. No fingerprints, no emergency contact. Only a reference code linked to a private hospital wing and a single word typed at the bottom, unclaimed. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for something inside me to shatter. Anger, confusion, even a rush of betrayal. But it never came. because the truth was, I'd already been claimed by the one person who mattered. I placed the file in a folder labeled "For Me Only" and tucked it into the back drawer of my desk. It didn't need to be on display. Some truths are not for proving. They are for closing. That spring, the Quiet Minds Fellowship launched its first full year. 12 students from overlooked counties, each selected not by grades or recommendations, but by the questions they asked in their essays. One girl, Ava, wrote a whole page on why moss prefers shadowed stone. One boy, Elias, described wanting to study the sound bees make when left alone for too long. They were brilliant, unpolished, and wholly themselves. During the first week, I handed each of them a notebook. Leather-bound, sturdy, with faint-lined pages. On the inside cover was a message I had embossed in gold foil. Legacy isn't blood. It's the love we choose to leave behind. They ran their fingers over the letters like it was something sacred. One afternoon, as we worked in the teaching garden, Elias looked up from a tray of compost and asked Miss Calloway, "Did someone give all this to you?" I paused, surprised by the timing of the question. "Yes," I said. "He gave it to me because he saw who I was, even when others didn't." "Was he family?" I smiled. "He chose to be." Elias thought for a moment, then nodded like he understood in a way no textbook ever could. That night, after the last student left, I walked to the back of the annex where Edgar's photo hung above the original plans for the foundation. I touched the corner of the frame with one hand, my other resting against the warm wood of the workbench we'd built together, me and the present him, through memory. "We're not finished," I whispered. "Not even close." Outside, past the windowpane, the magnolias were finally blooming, and for the first time in years, I did not feel like a ghost. I felt like a name someone had chosen to remember.